Hello everyone! In this guide, I will show you how to make your stage play smoothly with a gamepad using the floating interaction page. While this guide is aimed mostly at UI-based games, it can be useful for everyone, for example, when creating main menus. Since the Miliastra Wonderland editor is PC only and supports only mouse and keyboard, it's easy to sometimes forget about gamepad and mobile players when creating stages. In this video, I'll walk you through creating a UI that plays smoothly for every player, on PC, mobile and controller. Making your UI-based game or menus feel good for PC players is easy. Go to the Combat Preset tab. Then under Edit Player, look for Cursor Configuration and set it to Always Show Cursor. If your game isn't entirely UI-based and you only want the cursor in the main menu, you can toggle this on demand using the execution node Set Player's Cursor to Always Visible. In the same window, you can configure clickable layers and max selectable targets. This option determines the maximum number of targets that can be selected by the cursor. Lastly, we have the Allow UI Control Click-Through option. Disabling it causes cursor clicks to no longer reach the scene after passing through UI controls. You can also enable or disable this option on demand using execution node Set Player's Cursor to click through UI controls. Unfortunately, the built-in cursor doesn't work very well with controllers. It's slow, doesn't snap to anything, and its speed can be changed. For something like a main menu, it might be passable, but it's not a great experience. And since we want all players to have a great experience, this brings us to key mapping. Let's open the main menu and go to Manage UI Control Groups. In the interface layout, select Add UI Control, Prefabricated Template, and take a look at the Custom button. The tab we care about is the last one, Functions. Here you can map keys for your custom buttons for both keyboard, mouse, and gamepad. For keyboard and mouse, this is often not needed if you have the cursor enabled, but for controller players, it can already be better than using the cursor. And that brings us to one of the best options for navigating the UI with a controller, Floating Interaction Pages Custom button. Head to UI Control Group Library and click Add UI Control Template at the bottom. Then select Floating Interaction Page. And finally in the Style tab, select Edit Details under Page Container. Then click Add Container Control and select Custom button. This button is mostly identical to the one we saw before, but it has one big difference. A controller navigation tab under the key mapping settings. This option allows players to smoothly select interactive elements in your UI using just the analog stick, without having to map every single button. I will now show you how to set up this step by step, using my UI-based stage as a reference. Let's start by creating a floating interaction page. You can decorate your page with many available images or animations, but in this guide I'll focus strictly on gamepad controls. Say you want to make a main menu with 3 interactive buttons: Start, How to Play, and Settle Stage. To create each button, you need to click Add Container Control, and then select Custom button. In the Style tab, you can either select the preset style or, what I would suggest, choose Custom and design your own buttons using the default Hover and Pressed Status Asset tabs. Default Status Asset shows how the button looks when it's currently not selected by the player. You can create your button using 4 types of prefabricated templates: text box, image, UI animation, and special number. After finishing the default asset, I usually copy it into the hover and pressed asset groups and then tweak them slightly or add more animations there. You can do this by clicking the 3 dots, selecting Copy, switching to hover status asset group, selecting paste, and repeating for pressed status asset group. Hover status asset shows how the button looks when it's currently selected by the player but not yet clicked. This is where I usually add a few UI animations. You can choose from many UI animations, including both looping and non-looping effects. You can also choose whether your animation plays above or below all controls. If your main menu covers the entire screen, you must choose above all controls or the animation won't be visible. Lastly, we have the press status asset. It shows how the button looks when it's clicked by the player. I usually like to shrink both the text and the images a little in this tab, or add a small rotation. Once your button looks the way you want, go back to the Functions tab. When using controller navigation, you don't have to map any keys here, but you can leave them as an additional option. Enable clickable in click response area and either match the area range to the button size or select a custom size for a clickable area. You can preview this area by enabling Click Area Preview. Before going to the Controller Navigation tab, make sure you've created all your necessary buttons. First off, enable Controller Navigation by clicking Selectable via Controller Joystick Navigation. To preview the Controller Navigation hint, you have to enable Gamepad UI by selecting the appropriate icon at the top of the screen. You can choose either black or white Controller Navigation hint style, direction of the hint target, and navigation hint offset. This determines how the hint arrow looks when this button is selected with a controller. Finally, choose which interactable object in your floating interaction page will be selected when the player presses left, right, up or down on the controller. If left empty, it defaults to nearest control. You can also enable wrapping behavior this way, so for example pressing down on the last row moves to the first row, or pressing right on the rightmost column moves to the leftmost column, and vice versa. I will show this in detail in the next example. Now, go back to the UI Control Group library and click on your floating interaction page and go to Functions. In Controller Initial Selected Control, choose which button is active by default when the player opens the page. This is a nice quality of life improvement, so players don't have to navigate to the important part manually. For example, you can set the Start button as the initial selected control. That's pretty much it for this example. You just need a way to show the floating interaction page using node graphs. If you're making a main menu and want this page to appear instantly when player loads into the game, I highly recommend using When Client is Ready asset available on the Resource Center. Otherwise, you can use every other method, such as tap or collision. Of course, what we've created so far is pure UI with no logic attached. If you want your buttons to actually do something in-game, you need to create a node graph starting with the event node when floating interaction page is triggered, where interactive item index is the index of your custom button. As a quick example, let's say you want your Start button to close the page, your How to Play button to show a floating interaction page with instructions, and your Settle Stage button to declare the player victorious and settle the stage. Start by creating event node when floating interaction page is triggered, and make sure that the floating interaction page index is equal to the index of your main menu page. Then connect interactive item index to control expression in multiple branches. Since we have 3 interactive buttons we want to configure, multiple branches node has to have 3 outputs. Paste each button's index here. To close the page, we can use the Close Floating Interaction Page node, where the index should be the same as the equal node. To show a different floating page with instructions, we have to first create it like before, then paste its index into Show Floating Interaction Page, and finally, to settle the stage using the Settle Stage button, we can use 2 nodes: Set Player Settlement Success Status and Settle Stage. That was a very simple example on how to create logic for your custom buttons. This node graph has to be mounted on a player entity. You can do it by going into the Combat Preset tab, then the last tab under Edit Player, and finally Add Node Graph. In the second example, I want to showcase how to combine UI-based gameplay with prefabs. This is the scenery I used in my game. I created 9 stone elemental cubes and locked the player inside an invisible box. Using the Manage Main Camera settings, we can see exactly what the player sees when they load into the game. Since the player can't move, we can treat these stones as UI elements. Once again, let's create a floating interaction page. Most of the process will be similar, but this time we need to create 9 buttons. This time I want the buttons themselves to be pretty subtle, because players should be focused on the cubes. Copy your button 9 times and keep equal distances between them. There is no easy way to make the buttons fit perfectly to the visible prefabs. You will have to test and adjust as needed. Also in this case, you have to uncheck Sync Information to all devices and adjust the size and placement of your buttons on every device, since prefabs are not actual UI elements and will not sync properly to other resolutions. Rest of the settings are pretty much the same. This time also clearly showing the wrapping behavior mentioned earlier. When we're on the first button and press left on the gamepad, the third button is selected, and vice versa. The same applies vertically. Pressing up on the first button selects the seventh button. You'll have to carefully map every single button, but in the end your players will have a much smoother experience with your UI. As mentioned before, this guide covers only the UI itself. To make these buttons actually do something, you'll need to use node graphs. There's one issue with floating interaction pages. They can be closed with escape button on keyboard and A or B button on gamepad, and there is no built-in way to prevent that. You can work around this by using a node graph to reopen the page each time it's closed. This is done by using the index of the interaction page close button. This method requires you to create a custom escape button, because otherwise you can softlock yourself or your players and prevent them from leaving, since they'll never be able to reach the default escape key. I recommend being very careful when trying this method. That's it for this guide. With floating interaction pages and controller navigation, you can make your UI feel smooth and responsive for everyone, whether they're playing on PC, mobile or gamepad. The setup takes a bit of time, especially for more complex layouts, but the improvement in player experience should be worth it. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.